Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around and we'll leave you with a movie to watch over the weekend with your family or that special someone. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. My name is Nathan. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. Tonight's watch list is made up of 3 iconic Japanese movies. I'm extremely excited to talk about them today, but I also wanted to kind of introduce them because what's the point of doing an intro if you don't introduce things? So I want to say right now, for those of you who are uninitiated, let me tell you right now, although it may come as a shock, that Japan is known for more than just anime when it comes to the overall landscape of media. In reality, especially in the film world, Japan is known for creating incredibly iconic, unforgettable, and highly influential experiences. And tonight's movies are in that category. 3 of them, directed all by one guy by the name of Akira Kurosawa. These 3 movies, that being Seven Samurai from 1954, The Hidden Fortress from 1958, and Ikiru from 1952, were all directed by Akira Kurosawa, and some of them even co-wrote in some capacity by Akira Kurosawa. And Akira Kurosawa himself is often referred to as one of the most influential directors of all time. He may not be on the same level of Steven Spielberg in terms of quotability or instant recognition, but when it comes to film students such as myself, whenever you hear the name, having any amount of film history knowledge or just overall knowledge of film itself, you cannot avoid a name like Akira Kurosawa. So I'm incredibly excited tonight, and I hope you are too. Stick around after these few songs. I was about to say messages, but songs are not messages, they are just songs. These few songs when we jump into Seven Samurai. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. For our first movie on the watch list tonight, we are going to be taking a look at the movie Seven Samurai from 1954, available to watch now on Max. And I personally would highly recommend watching Seven Samurai, especially on Max, my quote-unquote favorite streaming service. I only say that quote-unquote because streaming is a nightmare and spawn of Satan, but that's neither here nor there when talking about movies themselves, because you can go on and on about the services that they're on, or you could talk about the movies, and I like to talk about the movies. So let's talk about this movie. Seven Samurai's initial sort of plot follows a group of farmers who live in a village in the mountains. These villagers eventually overhear this like kind of rumor that soon these pillagers or these raiders are going to come into town. And when I say pillagers or raiders, I know that's basically the exact same thing, but give me a minute here. They hear the story of these raiders who are planning to come and attack their village after the harvest season is more underway. And so they essentially come up with a plan to go and hire some samurai to protect their town from these ruthless criminals. And that's where the name Seven Samurai comes from, because as they go into town, they end up finding 7 samurai to help them and protect their town. This movie, okay, I think I need to kind of back up here for a second and really talk about why Seven Samurai is significant in any stretch of the imagination. By the way, I talked about these movies in the intro. You'd think I was talking about, I don't know, one of the most pioneering movies of all time, like one of the most influential movies of all existence. Well, that wasn't actually misplaced at all, because Seven Samurai basically birthed an entire genre of film. I'm not even kidding. Like, this movie has been incredibly successful and influential for multiple reasons. Part of it is just its overall style and cinematography. Like, you could study this movie endlessly, but its basic story of 7 characters coming together to fight one common goal from different backgrounds, different ways of life, and honestly just kind of all uniting under one central idea, which in this movie's case is that they all want food and they're fine with like fighting for the villagers if they can get food from it. So they basically all unite to get food from the villagers, and they're just like, okay, we're Ronin. We technically were samurai, but now we're roaming samurai who don't have a master anymore, because that's how that works. We'll come together just for the food of it. and end up getting mixed up in a lot of other things. The central point of that is that that story has been used for multiple groups of people in multiple movies over multiple years, multiple decades even. This movie has been influential to things like The Expendables, The Avengers, The A-Team, Ocean's 11, basically every heist movie where it's like, come on guys, let's get together for one last job. Are you in or are you out? This movie was the reason that ever happened, why that became a trope. I can't even like fully confirm that. I just know that from the bottom of my heart, based on how like iconic and just how basic this movie's storyline is in following that template. It's incredibly basic in its execution of the idea, but during doing research, it just becomes absolutely clear that this movie was the first one to do that kind of thing. It was the inspiration for that. So it makes sense that it's kind of generic. And like a lot of movies that tend to inspire the entire genre, it's usually the one that does it the best, or the one that follows it the most closely, or provides the template for it while still breaking the mold just a little bit. Seven Samurai does tend to break its mold just a little bit because it's not necessarily following rules. Following rules. Wow, that is words. Following the rules, because it's making up the rules. It's doing its own thing, and that's why it's copied. I will also say that I personally like Seven Samurai in terms of how influential it's been, but I will also say it's been a little while since I watched the movie, and when I did watch it, I wasn't fully versed in just how influential it was, or just overall what to expect from Akira Kurosawa as a director, that I basically had a bunch of stupid complaints, and I thought it'd be really fun to talk about them, because of course I have dumb complaints about one of the most influential and successful movies of all time, and one of the most important movies to possibly study in the realm of cinema. So here we go. I used to say that this movie would be better if it was in color. I was coming from a specific place there, but let me tell you right now, this movie was made in 1954. It's all in black and white, and there's no way they could have really, well, they may have been able to make it like color, but it's in black and white. You can't just go back and color the movie from black and white into regular colors. And I know what you're saying. Yes, you can. People do that all the time. The point is that you can't make it look good. It never looks good. It looks mismatched. It looks misplaced. You can't properly recolor this movie from black and white into actual colors and keep the meaning, the visual style of it intact. So that's a really dumb complaint. But when I was thinking about it, it was just like, from my perspective, it was incredibly hard to tell the samurai apart. There was only some very minor, like, physical distinctions in between them, since they all seem to be men with at least two of them having hair buns. But I think part of that problem just came from my inability to focus perfectly on the movie for every single second of it, which I can't fully be blamed for. It is a 3-hour long movie, but like, I should understand that like, there are differences in the characters. I feel like if I rewatched it, I could definitely pick out, okay, here's the physical trait, here's the personality to match that physical trait, here's why this character is significant to the story. I'm not necessarily defending these complaints because they were dumb ones. Let me tell you right now, just because I had them at one point doesn't mean I necessarily agree with them now, and I don't think they'd hold up after rewatching this movie. But part of that comes from the fact that I just need to rewatch it and maybe giving it a little too much credit. But it's worth bringing up either way. It's also important to keep in mind that regardless of what I think of it, it is objectively a trendsetter. This movie has been incredibly influential in some of the most like iconic themes of cinema. Without this movie, a lot of things wouldn't have happened. One specific example would have to be The Magnificent Seven, directed by John Sturges, with people like Steve McQueen and Yul Brynner in it. Like, that movie would not exist without Seven Samurai, in quite a literal sense. It also has Charles Bronson in it. I should have mentioned that. But it is important to note that Akira Kurosawa is responsible for one of the most iconic and most recognized movies of all time. And it's also worth noting that he could have just made that one movie that was incredibly influential. But Akira Kurosawa lives on in the hearts of filmmakers for years, and he's lived on for so long because he hasn't just made that one iconic movie. As we're going to talk about after the break when we jump into The Hidden Fortress, Akira Kurosawa was a trendsetter for more than just one genre. So stick around after the break where we jump into that fun can of fun. I wanted to say can of worms, but it's not a can of worms because it's not bad. So stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. I just had a voice crack while it's saying "Won the Burg," but that's not important. So for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we are going to be taking a look at The Hidden Fortress from 1958, available to watch on Max. To jump into the general plot of The Hidden Fortress, this movie is about two lowly figures who are basically just why did I say basically? They're peasants. Why did I say lowly figures? Two peasants that just okay, I know exactly why I didn't say that right off the bat. That sounds kind of mean, just saying two peasants. It carries such a bad connotation that I wanted to ease you in by saying lowly figures before jumping straight to peasants. But that's what they are. They're peasants. They're peasants, lowly peasants beneath my feet. Ah, ha, ha. I should move on. It's about two peasants who essentially end up getting roped into escorting this sort of, I guess, mysterious figure with a sword and a mysterious girl who also happens to have some kind of weapon. Unbeknownst to these two peasants, the man is an ex-samurai and the woman is a disguised princess. And the good chunk, like a good 1/4 of the movie, the first fourth of the movie, kind of takes place in the desert, right? And these two lowly figures have this kind of banter back and forth, one of them being more talkative than the other, one of them being taller than the other, and they end up getting roped into this very mysterious figure's plan that all involves a princess as well, as they go to find this hidden fortress, I believe is the name of the movie. So they're probably going to go find a hidden fortress, and it's set in the desert. And does this sound familiar to any of you? Let me tell you right now, the mysterious samurai character ends up fighting an old rival of his halfway through the movie for no discernible reason except to get back at him. And one of them ends up triumphant. And it's like a whole confrontation because the old rival also happens to have a massive army with him. And they all kind of surround their fight while this is happening. Does this sound familiar to anybody right now? If it doesn't, Star Wars. This is Star Wars with samurai swords. Do you get it now? Do you get it? Good. Legitimately, I'm not even making this up. I'm not even trying to say this to be incredibly obvious. This movie inspired Star Wars. This movie is notorious for being one of the prime examples of Star Wars inspiration. Star Wars was such a significant movie, partly just because of how cool all the effects were, but like story-wise, Star Wars is well known for borrowing multiple ideas from multiple different movies, multiple westerns and samurai movies. When people talk about the fact that Star Wars was inspired by samurai movies and that the lightsabers and the Jedi were all based on just the overall idea of the samurai and how it was portrayed in film up until that point, The Hidden Fortress is exactly the movie they are talking about. So I want you to keep that in mind when I say that this personally is my favorite Akira Kurosawa movie, not even for the fact that it inspired Star Wars. And that's crazy because I'm not a massive Star Wars fan, but like it's so obvious. It's so incredibly obvious that it inspired Star Wars that when watching it, it becomes like perfectly subconscious. You're watching it and you're going, I can see where they got this element for like episode 4 from this movie. Like I can see the scenes that they're ripping off here. Like that entire encounter I mentioned with the mysterious samurai figure and his old rival fighting. I'm literally just hinting to the fact that it's the inspiration for Kenobi versus Darth Vader in episode 4. It straight up is. You cannot tell me otherwise. And multiple people admit that. Who really has admitted that? George Lucas. He's admitted it outright. This movie inspired what would go on to become Star Wars. And yet, I still want to say, this movie is just not my favorite only because of that fact. I personally think that a lot of Kurosawa movies, I'm not even like scratching the surface of Kurosawa movies here. I've seen a couple of them aside from these three. Let me tell you right now, a lot of them are slow and methodical. That's not a bad thing, unless you're not in the mood for it, in which case slow and methodical translates into boring, which has happened at least once for me. Rather unfortunately, I think it was with Seven Samurai that I actually got bored watching it because it's a 3-hour-long movie. And I was just like, oh, this is not entertaining. And it's just like, it doesn't have to be entertaining. It has to be good. Or it has to communicate its message well enough. And I just wasn't sitting there looking for the message. I was just like, where are the sword fights? Why aren't there any more sword fights in the movie when it's about samurai? Blah, 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 blah. I'm really annoyed at how early on I watched Seven Samurai, because it would have sunk in so much deeper. And by comparison, after watching a couple Kurosawa movies before watching The Hidden Fortress, this movie sunk in so much better. I was like, all in on it. I was like, whoa, this is exactly where they're going with the story. I love the way it's going. I love it, the pace that it's going at, because as I've said, the Kurosawa movies that I've seen tend to be slow and methodical. They tend to take their time. They're really trying to get you into the flow before jumping ahead too much. It's still contributing to the story, but it's more spaced out. The Hidden Fortress, boom, 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 boom. It's so much more fast and snappy and to the point that it stands out from all the Kurosawa movies I've seen. And I love it for that. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate the slow and methodicalness. Methodicalness is definitely a word that I didn't just make up. The slow and methodical style of the other Kurosawa movies that I have seen before, this movie may be breaking the mold a little bit. And I appreciate the methodical side. But I also appreciate breaking the mold and stepping up the pace a little bit. One of them appeals to me more, while I can still appreciate the other. That's the point I'm trying to get at. And honestly, I would say that The Hidden Fortress is my favorite Kurosawa movie. I have said it. I've definitely, without doubt, said this is my favorite Kurosawa movie that I've seen. Again, not just because of it inspiring Star Wars, but I will throw it in there and say that having it be the one that inspired Star Wars certainly helps it for being my favorite Kurosawa movie. Now, I would like fully champion it and say this is the best one out of all of them. But, and this is a big but, the movie that I think is Kurosawa's best work, the one that I've seen that I legitimately thought was the best crafted of all of these, is our next movie, Ikiru. And I can't wait to talk about it, because I just can't get enough of Ikiru. But I can't jump into it now, so stick around until after the break, where we jump into our last movie on the watch list. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. For our last movie on the watch list tonight, we are going to be taking a look at the movie Ikiru from 1952, available to watch on Max. This movie's plot follows an aging bureaucrat who is diagnosed with terminal cancer and basically spends the rest of the movie trying to figure out what to do with the very short amount of time he has left on the earth. Okay. I don't know where to go from here. I want to say that this, I'm trying to convince you guys to watch this movie, right? That's what I'm trying to do here. Okay, good. Thank you, non-existent producer, for telling me that. I don't know how to sell this to you. Oh, I know. Wait, no. Let me just go through the points here. Let's just kind of analyze just going off of that. So, if you can imagine it, this movie is very sad. And I know that's kind of a bold statement, honestly. Like a movie about someone getting terminal cancer and having to figure out what to do with the rest of his very short life is an incredibly sad movie. Really. I never would have guessed that. I could be more sarcastic, but I physically can't. Mostly because it's honestly just such a sad situation in general to really be mimicking in a movie anyways, because it's such a real thing. Physically, I can't be more sarcastic than that. Like my brain won't allow me to be more sarcastic. And honestly, all I can really do is fold and say, yeah, no, this movie is just it takes a bit of a toll watching it just because of how hopeless of a scenario it is to begin with. And then to add on to that, the filmmakers, bless them, Akira Kurosawa, I love your style and your willingness to go above and beyond. But, like, honestly, did you have to make it so relentless in the way that you portray this man's life? Because it sucks. I can't, that's not even me joking or being sarcastic. His life sucks. He's a bureaucrat who's old. His kid doesn't care about him at all. All he wants is to, like, find meaning, and everybody gets in his way at every single step. He tries to find meaning in the world, and he just doesn't at all. Or at least you don't think he does at all. You are left with this incredibly sad turn of events where nothing gets resolved for about an hour. Then the halfway point hits. And the second half is, I'll admit, this is a spoiler, but it's after he dies. All of his friends and his family members come together into a funeral, and they come in to remember him and remember his last couple months after whatever happened to him happened. He doesn't actually tell anybody, which makes it so much more painful because people would have understood what he was going through if he had told them, but he just doesn't. And they treat him like garbage because they don't know that he's going through such a painful experience. But again, that's all sour grapes in comparison to what happens over the next hour to 40 minutes of the movie. 40 minutes to an hour. Let me reverse those, because an hour to 40 minutes is not how you count things up. You count them down. 40 minutes to an hour, rest of the movie. You get this incredibly subversive take on how you tell a story about a man who tries to find meaning in his life. Nor will you just see him kind of fight his way till the end. Maybe he eventually does find the meaning that he's looking for. But you never really get the confirmation of that until the actual very end. And you don't see him struggle through that. You see his friends and his family members struggle to understand why he was doing what he was doing in his last couple months. Because again, they haven't been told of his condition, but they straight up just don't understand a lot of his actions. And a lot of it's told through flashbacks where people go, wait, I remember him doing this. Why was he doing all of that? Why did he feel the need to do this kind of thing? And normally, I wouldn't expect this. I went into this movie expecting it to go, okay, for 2 hours, we're just going to see him constantly struggle, and we're going to see him at the end kind of finally triumphantly returning. It's not necessarily, it is a spoiler in the way of the actual storyline of the movie. And I should say that I'm completely comfortable with spoiling Ikiru, because that's what I expected the plot to be. But it kind of messes around with the timeline a little bit. You get these flashbacks, you get these people kind of trying to comprehend it, and what I can't spoil for you is their feeling of confusion channeled into you as you watch this unfold after you've already seen it from his perspective for about an hour of what he's going through. And then once you get to the end of their whole kind of retelling of the events, you stop and go, wait, I know what he was doing. They don't. Now I feel somewhat vindicated. And the final scene is him basically finding the meaning he's been looking for. And the reason I'm laughing is because I, again, can't spoil the feeling of relief and gratitude you feel while watching this movie and realizing that he gets exactly what he's looking for by the end of the movie. By the end of it, you know exactly what he wanted. He gets it, and I can't spoil that feeling for you. This movie is not about its plot. I will say wholeheartedly, the plot is great, but it is not about the plot. It is about the feelings you get from it. And full disclosure, if I had seen this movie later in my life, when I watch this movie again, which will definitely happen, I will watch this movie when I am 50 years old. And by the time I get to that last scene, I will be bawling on the floor. I am not even exaggerating. I will be so emotionally distraught and relieved at the same time at the movie that I have just watched. And that's Ikiru for you. That's the best way to describe it. I cannot overstate how much I would recommend this movie to anybody, because it's a masterclass in, it's not just about the story. It's about the feeling, the way you feel when you watch a movie. I can't even come close to being on the same level that Akira Kurosawa was on when making something like Ikiru. All I want to do is make funny comedies, man. I can't make this about emotional distress and distraught and just what the overall feeling is of what it's like to live your life. I can't do that. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. Akira Kurosawa wasn't perfect. But dang it, he made a very good movie, and I can't be on that same level. I can't recommend Ikiru enough, honestly. And again, it's not about the story. It's about how that story makes you feel. And again, I'd be crying if I watched that movie again. But so be it. I'll leave you with this, and I will say that any Akira Kurosawa movie gets a high recommendation. There's none that stand above the crowd. As much as I've oversold Ikiru to you, it doesn't mean that it's less influential than Seven Samurai. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't watch The Hidden Fortress. If you love Star Wars, you'll love The Hidden Fortress. It's a fact of nature, essentially, because you're basically just watching Star Wars before Star Wars was a thing. So with that, all I want to say is if you want to hear my opinions on more Akira Kurosawa movies, because like I said, I've seen a lot of other ones, then tune in to What to Watch Weekends this Saturday at 9 a.m. Thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Wednesdays. Please follow the Instagram page for What to Watch Wednesdays at What to Watch Wednesdays, all no caps, no spaces. And I will see you all next Wednesday here on 88.1 The Burg from 8 to 9 p.m. This is Nathan, signing off.